In this presentation, I will discuss how we can take a design science research paper and analyze it, describe it, summarize it using the design science canvas. We will use an example paper here, and it's a paper about motivation and data quality in a citizen science game, and it's about the design science evaluation. So that's our starting point, this research paper. And I would suggest that you take a little time and read through this paper before you continue watching the presentation. And the paper here, it's about data quality in citizen science and in games also. And citizen science, it's an idea where scientists try to recruit lots of ordinary people, lots of citizens, ordinary persons, and they will help the scientists with some easy, simple tasks, for example, classifying various objects into different categories. So this is where the paper is situated. And what we are going to do is to try to analyze it and summarize it and describe it and to get this representation in the form of a design science canvas. So this will be our end result. And I suggest here an approach consisting of 8 steps. Of course, it's not at all necessary to use exactly these steps in this order, but it is one way of getting started. And I'll try to show how you can look upon the paper in order to identify the most important parts for each of these steps or components and where in the paper you should look also. The first step, it's about identifying the artifact. Is very simple. I mean, it is a design science paper. It's about designing or evaluating some artifact. So there must be some artifact that the paper is about. So the very first step is just find this artifact and just name it and specify its type. Don't go into the details. And typically, you will find some description of this artifact very early in the paper, often in the end of the first section. So here are some excerpts from this example paper, and they are stating here, okay, there is some game that they are going to look upon. It's called Happy Match, and it's a classification game where you point at different objects and you try to classify them. And they're talking about this one, and they're talking about game-like features. So clearly it is a game that it's all about. So we can easily fill in the beginning of this artifact box in the design science canvas, the type of the artifact, an instantiation, and it's a game, it's called Happy Match, and it's part of some bigger project. Then we move right away to step 2 here, and it's about describing the practice. This artifact, it's going to be used in some situation, in some context, in a practice. So it's important to get a grip on this practice right away. So you can just check out the beginning of the paper. Typically, the practice is described there, and you should describe its purpose, the main activities, and participants. And in fact, in this example paper, the practice is described directly in the very beginning of the paper. They're talking here about citizen science. Members of the public are recruited to contribute to scientific investigations. They can help classify astronomical photographs and birds and so on. So this is what this practice is about, and it's not difficult to summarize it here. Citizen science, it's a practice where ordinary private people are recruited by scientists. They assist with data collection and data analysis. And the very idea here is that it should be possible to collect and analyze huge amounts of data in a short time and not to such a high cost. And the people involved are researchers, scientists, and ordinary people. Then on to step 3 here, that is finding the problem. Why are we at all working on this? Why are we building this artifact? And the problem is also typically to be found in the beginning of the paper. We should describe the practical problem to be addressed, formulate it precisely and concisely, and tell why it is important. And here we find some excerpts that are about the problem. And here it is that can we design really a classification game that achieves good data quality? Will people, ordinary people, really produce good results? And the other problem here, will this kind of game really motivate ordinary people so they are prepared to contribute? So we can formulate the problem here. One key problem is that people are not interested in contributing to these citizen science projects. And if they participate, the quality of their contributions may be low. So clearly this is an important problem, because if the contributions have low quality, they are useless for scientists. And also people must be motivated, so you can get lots of people participating and producing and generating data and analyzing the data. So clearly we have some practical problems around here. Then we should look into the knowledge base and what kinds or sources of knowledge are used for building the artifact. This can be one of the trickier parts, because this information about that knowledge base, it's often scattered all over the paper. But one way to get a grip on it is to look at the references and see which references seem to have to do something with the knowledge base, and then you can work from that. Here are some excerpts that are about the knowledge base. This one talks a lot about species level, biologists, and so on, seem to be more natural science stuff. This one talks about basic motivations for individuals. Why should you care to work on some activity? And this is in fact some kind of motivation theory, this paper number 12. Here are some other motivational theories and tools. This one is also talking more about citizen science in general and about gaming. So we can find some various sources of knowledge that are being used in this paper. So at least biological science, citizen science, computer games, and motivation theories, these are parts of the knowledge base. Then on to the requirements. Describe the requirements for the artifact. And these requirements, they're often discussed when the artifact has been introduced, but some requirements may appear later on in the paper. And we should also note that sometimes a design science paper more or less skip the requirements. They go directly to the problem. Because why do you introduce requirements? The point is that when you should carry out your evaluation, it is sometimes, or very often in fact, difficult to directly check if the problem has been solved or not by means of your artifact. It becomes easier if you introduce some requirements that work like a bridge between the problem and the evaluation of this problem. But it's not, in fact, always necessary to introduce so many requirements and to focus on them. You can, in your evaluation, go directly to the problem and check if the problem has been solved or not. And this paper is such a paper. The example paper here, it almost skips the requirements, and it just focuses on how well this happy match game is able to address the problems. Still, anyway, it's possible to extract a few requirements, but they play, in fact, a minor role in this paper. Here are some functional and non-functional requirements. For example, that online help should be provided, and the game should be playable by novices. The first one is functional, the second one is non-functional. But, as I said, these things are not very important in this paper. The requirements are not that important. Then we can go back now when we have learned a little more about the paper and describe the artifact in more detail. And again, you often find these artifact details pretty early in the paper, but sometimes, it can be found anywhere. So you should describe the structure and behavior and functions of the artifact and how it is to be used in the practice. For example, here again we have this talk about Happy Match. It's a taxonomic classification game. And it's in the citizen science context and so on. And what it is about practically is that you give this kind of screen to an ordinary person, to the user, and the user should tell, okay, what is this animal? And now it's a special case of this happy match. It's about moths. It's called Happy Moth, this one. So you should click on this one and say, okay, what kind of moth is that one, and what kind of moth is that one? And you should try to classify them into the right categories. This is what the game is about. So we can describe it in this way, that Happy Match, it's a point and click based game related to taxonomic classification of animals and plants, and particularly in this very case, it's about moths. The players, they get to see some photographs of animals and plants, and they should classify them. And there is also some kind of scoring system that will motivate them to do better and better. And main idea is that the game should make participation in citizen science projects more fun to be in. Then on to the research process, including the method use. This is normally not difficult to find in the paper. There's often some big section called method or research process, or you can look for keywords, for example, data collection or data analysis or research strategy or research method and so on, and you will find where this research process is. Here are just a few excerpts again from the example paper, showing that they are working on some laboratory experiment. They are recruiting a number of subjects that are to do various things, they are to carry out some tasks, and you have data collection here, where the different players do things, and you collect by observing them, and then there is some analysis, plotting histograms, and blah, blah, blah. That's what you are going to do. So I summarize it here. The main research strategy, it's a laboratory experiment. About 100 people played this happy match. The evaluation strategy was exposed. That is, the artifact was in fact already built, so you used the real artifact. It was artificial, it was in a constructed environment that the experimenters, the researchers had built themselves. And the behavior of the players was observed and assessed, and furthermore, the players filled out a questionnaire, and then you used descriptive statistics for analysis. So this is a very short summary of the research process. Maybe it is in fact a little on the short side. Some more details could have been useful to get a better feel for this research process. But anyway, it is one way of summarizing it. And then finally on to quality and effects. How well does the artifact actually work, and are there possible side effects? And the quality of the artifact, how well it works, that you can often find directly after the research process, and then there's often a summary of it in the concluding section, and this concluding section, it also includes a discussion on side effects and consequences such as ethical and societal consequences of using this artifact. So here you can find some excerpts on this. And in fact, I have to admit that I found it a little difficult to find any real clear and explicit answers to this. It's a little vague, I think. For example, they say, our preliminary trial suggests that with some work, gamification could produce usable data, and so on. Accuracy on the characters was high enough to be useful. And so they're gone. It's a little vague, I think, but how I tried to summarize it was then like this. The game had a positive effect when it came to teaching and educating players. it was not so clear that the players found the game motivating, and the user's ability to classify was good enough to produce data useful for scientific purposes. A little vague, as you see here in the summary, but that somehow, I think, reflects also what the paper said. And by that we can conclude. We have started from this research paper, then we worked through we worked through the paper, and we filled in a systematic way this design science canvas, and we arrived at a neat summary and presentation of our analysis.